Hello, see this wall? It is somewhat Cyclopean, less in the sense of being built with odd-shaped stones, and more because it is using large blocks, actually too large, massive boulders, each one the size of a bus, in solid rock. Although the size of these blocks is truly impressive, generally speaking, megalithic heavy transit carrying big boulders around would not represent an impossible challenge for ancient builders. At least if we disregard mainstream academia and their unrealistic dogmas. Yes, many of the mysteries concerning how ancient builders were powerlifting are created by weak academics. Of all the mysteries concerning ancient megalithic structures, meaning made with large blocks of stone, the most commonly YouTube concerns how the primitive builders could move around massive rocks without the benefit of powerful machinery. And to no surprise, these displaced gigantic stones are both the cause for wonder over the ingenuity of ancient peoples and excitement to the imagination of all of us, helpless little city creatures who drive to the gym to run on an electric treadmill. Just look at some examples of the mega absurdly big stoneworks ancient people packed with just their muscles and brains. Starting with the pyramids, that immediately come to mind when the topic is how the heck could ancient anybody put up that brutal tent in time for a funeral, when the much smaller museum to the side of it was under construction for over 20 years. Before that, there were the dolmens and other megalithic Neolithic stuff, including the famous and, to the standards of the time, dwarfish Stonehenge. These are older than the pyramids, built by peoples way more primitive, and still they are to be found everywhere in large numbers, hundreds of displaced multi-ton boulders piled up all the way from Portugal to Korea. Plus a bunch of other cases, each one magnificent on its own. The walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, combining mind-boggling perfect fitting with impressive sized stones. Or the serious big heads from Easter Island, carried around by some starving people inhabiting the world's most remote land. And last but not the least, but the most, the Trilithon of Baalbek, Lebanon. Not one, but three monstrosities, each weighing 800 tons, that are the biggest blocks of stones ever moved by ancient humans, or so we're told. Each one of these massive cases and many others alike are so heavy that even today, after going to the moon, or so we're told, they would be extremely difficult to move around. And yet, there they are, out of place, carried on the backs of people that were one step ahead of cavemen, or so we're told. It's only human, I guess. After noticing a bunch of big boulders misplaced in an ancient ruin, we cannot but wonder how the heck they got into there. And since some humans have quite the imagination, soon enough they are making YouTube videos with the most outlandish theories on how to carry big boulders into ancient megalithic monuments. Let's drop an eye onto some ideas. Idea 1. Maybe the boulders were carried in powder form to be reassembled later on site. This is called the geopolymer hypothesis, in which the big stones were not even stones to start with, but more like cakes, some chemical powder that could be carried in small buckets before mixing into a paste and dried. Idea 2 requires the use of some crazy flotation device, not a boat, but a whole river diverted uphill to allow the stones to be ferried upstream. Or 3. Anti-gravity lasers mounted on dinosaurs by aliens. This is my personal favorite because I am, like everybody else, entitled to have preferences. And finally, the Cyclops, one-eyed giants or other mythical oversized creatures that never existed and whose name is misused, since Cyclops have nothing to do with the super strong breed of elephant-like giants, but with the precision work required to assemble 3D stone puzzles. That much you probably know already if you have been following this channel. Or else you could easily fix it by clicking on the bell thingy below and becoming like a king in the land of the blind. Moving on, fun as they are, all these advanced transport systems are just not realistic and should be limited to science fiction novels. Although we know ancient people were exceptional at carrying heavy boulders around, it seemed they didn't quite realize how much so. At least that's what is shown by the larger than all the other blocks to be found abandoned in quarries. For example, the biggest of all the Easter Island's angry headers is half cooked and still in the quarry. The biggest obelisk in Egypt is equally partially attached to the bedrock in Aswan. The Inca would call the boulders abandoned by the side of the road, impossible to move any further, as piedras cansadas, translation, the tired stones, as if the Inca were not doing the work themselves. And fittingly, since the biggest moved blocks are found in Baalbek, Lebanon, that is also where the biggest unmovable blocks was abandoned, a 1,200-ton folly sitting unfinished in the quarry. That was called the Pregnant Lady, which is a strange name. I'd call it your mama. Thus proving a curious point, that the builders did not know what they were getting into when they started moving the blocks, and more often than not would realize midway into the carving that they were shopping for more than they could carry. Some people are stronger than others. Some people's builders, are stronger than other people's builders, with the strongest seemingly happy to be moving big stuff around, not trying to do an ancient world's version of the strongest man competition, the TV show with Scandinavian Hercules carrying stuff that was never supposed to be moved, yet doing exactly that. Here are some examples of ancient peoples carrying big stones. The dolmen capstones erected by the megalithic folks can weigh 100 tons apiece, and big as they are, were moved around with nothing more than weed rope and brute force, as demonstrated by these 1950 images of a random tribe in Papua flexing their muscles. The Romans are likely the best example, because they went all over the Mediterranean, and instead of bringing home properly sized refrigerator magnets or seashells for souvenirs, they would have some big stones leading to Rome, notably obelisks from Egypt, weighing at 450 tons apiece. From Antony to Cleopatra, the Egyptians had plenty of other oversized bibelots beyond the pyramids, such as the twin colossus of Memnon, sharing 1,400 tons between the two. All in all, the relevance of these examples is that we can see, or in the case of the Romans read, how the massive stone's weight was transported without the benefit of complex machinery, further proving it could and was done, since from the Ice Age into the Dull Age. When it comes to big boulders, no one beats the builders of Baalbek, whoever they were, with 800 tons apiece, times 3, up in the 5th floor. The Trilithon dwarfs all the other ancient sites in terms of heavy lifting. But there's more. There are plenty of other big stones laying around that area. Not only in the Baalbek complex, that on top of the Trilithon has a whole row of mega blocks slightly less big yet still monstrous, but also elsewhere in the Mediterranean. One can find mega blocks piled up, too big to be just a coincidence. Nearby, in the coast of Syria, in the island of Arwad, someone made some stone Jenga with blocks, each one the size of a shipping container. The holy western wall of Jerusalem is built over some overweight blocks, with the biggest one left inside the tunnel, weighing 600 tons. In Sicily, the town of Cephalou is all built on top of a wall made out of blocks, weighing more than any person with common sense should consider moving. Then Tarragona in Spain is surrounded by some brutal big stones underneath a Roman wall. And in Albania, some big boulders are creating a necropolis in a town named, interestingly, Phonik. That name, Phonik, is relevant because the original inhabitants of all those places, Cephalou, Tarragona, etc., were, before being kicked out by the Romans, the Phoenicians. So, could the Phoenicians be the builders of all those big blocks, a breed of giants, one-eyed or not, with a thing for oversized Legos? Well, no. And it is not only me that is saying it, it's academia. Although, in a twisted way, I end up agreeing with them. Academics say the Phoenicians were not building all that big stuff, because the Romans were, despite having no reason to say that. Whilst I think neither the Phoenicians nor the Romans were carrying the stones due to the inconsistency and lack of time. Meaning, the Phoenicians were short-lived in all those places with big boulders, and also most of the cities they actually built, like Carthage, have no sort of big stuff to show up. Thus, they do not seem like the heavy-lifting gym bro types to carrying all this stuff. On the other hand, I also have no idea who might have done it. Confused yet? I'm afraid it's getting worse before improving. Slightly. You see, wondering how the stone blocks were carried around by ancient peoples is often the wrong question. The right one being how long it took to move the big stuff, because primitive builders, when not in a rush, could really lift, as we've seen in Papua. The underlying problem here is that academics came up with absurd timelines for constructions. They say each pyramid, the biggest buildings ever made with over 6 million blocks apiece, plus all the other stuff around, were all built in time for one funeral, in a few years, leaving less than 2 minutes to cut, transport and fit each stone into place. Likewise, in Peru, the Inca were said to be building all that wonderful stuff at the same time they were fighting both a pandemic and a civil war, leaving them with barely 50 years to complete most of the works. The Roman temples in Baalbek were built between 16 AD to 60 AD, leaving zero time to carry around the massive stones and create the platform. Neither the Phoenicians had time for it, wandering in all those places in the Mediterranean Sea just for a short while, before being kicked out by the Romans. Finally getting into sort of a pattern. Not only the blocks are massive, built for the ages, we are told they were built in a rush, speeding all the way from the quarry until the destination, just to fit within the super tight schedule academics came up with. No wonder the stones got tired after being carried around at such neck-breaking speeds. Here's the thing. Carrying big boulders with primitive tools is not impossible. All it took was long, brutal, hard work. What confuses everybody are the absurd timelines invented by out-of-touch academics, also enabling dreams of fantastic technology to complete all the ancient megalithic wonders within a blink of an eye. Instead of claiming unrealistic deadlines, as in each pyramid being fully operational just in time for a funeral, if the mainstream admitted those things might be completed over centuries by generations of very committed workers, the whole ordeal would become much more manageable, dispensing with the need to find mythical technology for moving the big blocks, thus solving a problem that was never there in the first place. That's what you get for listening to the wrong people. Because, silent as they are, the Cyclopean walls never lie, as we'll see next. That's it for today. Hope you liked it. Drop an eye into the comments.